Hi, I'm Mark from eReplacementParts.com. In this video, I'm going to show you how to install an overhaul kit in a Porter cable nail gun. The overhaul kit is meant to solve any air leak issues you have with your gun, specifically air leaking from the top of the gun, from the trigger valve, or out the bottom of the gun. And we'll show you how to install that kit now. We'll start by taking a look at what comes in our kit. We have a new trigger valve, all of the O-rings to seal up the gun, a new bumper that goes in the bottom of the gun, a top gasket, some lubrication, and a pick to help in replacing the O-rings, and a set of instructions. We'll begin the repair with a little disassembly. I need to remove the top of the gun, the nose piece on the gun, and remove the magazine away from the nose piece. I'll start with the top. There's 4 fasteners that hold the top to the body of the gun. Now I'll move on to removing the magazine. And now I can slide the magazine away from the gun. With the magazine out of the way, now I can move on to the 4 fasteners that hold the nose piece to the body of the gun. And now I can remove the nose piece from the body of the gun. Now we need to remove the cylinder assembly. This is held in place by some O-rings, and it can be kind of hard to remove. A secret to remove it is to use a soft rubber mallet. We'll use the mallet to hit the body of the gun, and when we hit the body, that'll allow the cylinder to come free. Like that. There's also an inner ring around the cylinder that needs to come out. I can just pull that out. And now I'll remove the piston and the bumper from the cylinder. I've laid out all of our O-rings from the kit. Now it's just a matter of replacing the O-rings one at a time. Our kit came with a little tube of grease. I'll install a little bit of that grease on each one of the O-rings that we replace. Now I can replace the check valve. You'll notice the check valve has a shoulder on one end. That end should be towards the top of the cylinder. When I replace the check valve, I want to make sure that I have that shoulder up. Now we'll replace the O-ring on the piston. And a little more grease. Next, we'll replace the O-ring on this metal ring that supports the cylinder inside the housing of the gun. and a little more of the grease. Now we'll move on to the head. I'll start by removing this cage and then the head valve. The valve has 3 O-rings, 2 on the outside and 1 located on the inside. To access the one on the inside, I need to remove this piece. If I just pull it off to the side, it'll come out of the valve assembly. That inner O-ring is located right here. I'll remove that inner O-ring. And replace it with the new one. And more grease. Now we can do the outer 2 O-rings. And grease. With all of the new O-rings installed in the head valve assembly and in the cylinder, we can begin reassembling the gun. I'll start with the head valve assembly. Now I'll slide our piston back into the cylinder. As part of that, we'll replace the lower bumper. The bumper needs to go in a certain direction. You'll notice there's an arrow on it pointing up. I'll slide the bumper over the piston, and then slide the piston and the bumper into the cylinder. And I'll set that aside for now. Now we'll replace the nose piece. There is 1 O-ring on the nose piece we'll need to replace. This O-ring seals the nose piece to the body of the gun. And now I can reinstall the nose piece onto the body. The reason I removed the magazine earlier is the magazine adds a lot of additional weight to the nose piece. If the magazine were installed, I can potentially pinch that O-ring on the bottom of the nose piece, so it's just easier to do without the magazine. Now we'll install the cylinder and piston assembly back into the gun. First, I'll slide that metal ring onto the cylinder. This is the ring that aligns the cylinder to the housing of the gun. Now you'll notice I have the piston extended all the way out of the cylinder. This makes it easier to install it into the gun, because you can see where the piston is going. You'll see inside the gun, there's a D-shaped opening that we need to align the piston to. With the piston out of the cylinder like it is, we can just see that and it's easier to install the piston. And then the whole assembly slides into the gun. Now we'll install the head back onto the gun. First, we'll replace the new gasket. And now I'll just tighten up all the fasteners, a little at a time, working my way around the gun so I get a good seal. Now we'll move on to rebuilding the trigger valve assembly. We'll start by removing the trigger and then the valve. The trigger is held in place by a small little O-ring on a pin. I'll remove that O-ring and then pop the pin out, and then the trigger will come out of the gun. There's two types of valves that Porter Cable used on their guns. Some that thread in place like mine, and some that are held in place with a couple of roll pins. For the thread-in type, we use a small wrench and just simply unscrew the valve. Here I have the new valve from the kit. If your gun is the type that uses the roll pins, you're in luck. You can just install the new valve right into the gun. If your gun is like mine with the thread-in valve, well, you're going to have a little more work. We need to rebuild this valve using the parts out of the one in the kit. I'll start by disassembling the new valve. There's two roll pins that hold the valve together, and I'm using a small punch to push those away. I'm going to hold down on the top of the valve because there's a spring in there. If I don't, this will shoot out of the valve assembly. Now I'll disassemble the valve that came out of our gun. It just simply pulls apart, and we find similar components. On many of these pieces, we're simply going to replace them straight across, such as this brass piece, the spring, and the inner valve. You'll notice there's some O-rings that we also need to replace, one on the top of the valve assembly and one on this piece. And now we can reassemble everything back together. We'll put a little of our grease on each of the O-rings and then reassemble the valve. Now we can install the rebuilt valve back into the gun. And I'll reinstall the trigger. The kit includes a new O-ring to hold the trigger pin in place. And now we can complete the repair by reinstalling the magazine. And that's how you install an overhaul kit in a Porter cable nailer. If you found this video helpful, please feel free to leave a comment or ask us a question.